Apparently, this stuff prints hotter than PLA, costs about the same, and is a bunch tougher. Is PETG really any good? Let's find out. Corey, what is PETG?
Oh, polyethyl terraformed glycerin.
Okay. That was the closest you've ever gotten on any of them. Okay, polyethylene terephthalate glycol.
That's how they get you. Is it the THPH?
It is TEREPHTH.
They get you with the
When you did that in the last video, I was like, what is he talking about? Because I saw you did that and I was like, oh, Corey's just being a silly guy.
No, it's
Polyethylene terephthalate.
Who
that
decided?
was exactly how you said it too.
Who decided?
So we've just started playing around with PETG here at BIQU Prints, just a little bit more. But I hear you asking, where is it used in real life? Do people actually use PETG in things other than 3D printing?
Take it away, Corey. Where is PETG used in real life?
Real life use cases, we use it a lot in water bottles. It's food safe, so food containers, in the medical field quite often, since it can be sterilized easily. It's resistant to chemicals, water, all that sort of thing. Used in machinery, endpoint stuff. It has impact resistance, so it can be used over and over and over and not wear and tear as much as PLA or some of your other plastics.
Okay, I believe you. PETG exists other places. It's not just a 3D printing filament. But how do you even print it? I know everybody prints with PLA and that's really easy, but what do you need to do to print PETG anyway?
Corey, let's say you're learning about 3D printing. How do you print PETG?
You're going to want a heated bed of at least 50 degrees Celsius. You want to have your hot end. Some people say as low as 220. I feel like that's too low.
The internet said you can print it as low as 220. I'm not Mr. Print Expert. I'm not a plasticologist. But I don't think you're printing PETGs at 220. That's still in PLA range. This PETG nacho needed to be printed at like 275. 220? That's silly.
It's in the air right now. There's a lot of controversy over PETG.
Comment below what you print your PETG at.
How low can you go?
Anyway, alright, yeah, so 250 range, like you're saying, that's good. What else?
It prints stringier, as you're saying, the glycol. So you might need to adjust your print speeds a little bit. Some people suggest turning off your fan when you're printing to start with for better adhesion, and then turn it back on once it's starting to go.
Yeah, so often you'll get first layer, you'll turn off your part cooling fan. You want the plastic to be as molten as possible, then after it leaves the extruder, you want it to solidify as quick as possible. Turning off your part cooling fan makes it stay more liquidy.
Better adhesion.
Better adhesion as a result. So usually you'll see that for the first layer, first 2 layers or something. Then you get good bed adhesion. Interesting.
So PETG prints a little bit hotter, and because of that, it's got a couple of different features that make it different than PLA. It's not necessarily better, but people use PETG for different things than they would use PLA.
People like it for its mechanical properties. It's tough, works well in high impact environments, so I would use it for gears, cogs, functional sort of parts. It's water resistant, so it can be made to hold liquids, water bottles, potter plants, all sorts of things.
Now I hear you asking, isn't printing PETG really hard? I mean, I watched your last video and it looked like you guys really messed up super bad. It's probably really hard to print, right? In reality, printing PETG isn't really that difficult. Anybody can do it with just about any printer these days. It prints a little bit hotter than PLA and it's a little bit stringier, but by and large you probably won't have very many issues. If you're like me and you forget to put glue stick on your bed though, you may have some issues on glass print beds. Otherwise, PETG pretty much prints just like PLA.
So the only things of note in terms of printing, it prints pretty easy. It's really similar to PLA. It prints hotter than PLA, so maybe you get better layer adhesion. It's maybe a little bit stringier than PLA, so you need to adjust your settings accordingly. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't require an enclosure. It doesn't get waterlogged too fast. It will absorb water, though, that is one thing.
I've seen a lot of people say debates on whether to have it in an enclosure or not. Say if you're going through it, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
If you're going to leave it and chill it out for 6 months, then that's where you want an enclosure.
Which we saw with this one. And when you say enclosure, you mean dry box.
Dry box, sure. Which is an enclosure.
Enclosure is different. Enclosure is heated.
But they enclose it.
No, Corey. The education.
They encompass.
I thought it'd be good to take a second and explain that a dry box and enclosure are two different things. Corey's a silly guy, and I don't know very much about 3D printing, but I've been doing it for a little while. An enclosure is something you put your whole printer in so it can enclose it, and it heats up. So it keeps the level of temperature inside of the chamber a consistent, warm temperature. You use that for your styrene-based stuff that likes to split because it has a lot of internal forces working the piece apart as it's printing. So it keeps everything roughly the same temperature while the part is being built. A dry box is kind of an enclosure in that it encloses your filament, but that controls the moisture level in the air around the filament, whereas the enclosure for your printer controls the temperature level around the workpiece. Does that make sense?
This one, you'll see in our last video, had a lot of issues printing because the filament was waterlogged to a degree, and so I had to dry it out in the dry box where it was enclosed. And
So in the dry box enclosure.
then it printed better after I dried it out. Baked all that water out of it.
So if you find yourself only printing PLA, usually that's fine. I think PLA gets kind of a bad rap for being something that's weak or only used for parts that need to look pretty. In reality, PLA is pretty good for most applications. But then that kind of begs the question, when would I want to choose PETG instead of PLA for my print?
So, when it comes to 3D printing applications, PETG is usually used for things that people don't want to use PLA for. So stuff that maybe needs to be outside in the sun, but not necessarily because it's not super UV resistant. It's like PLA, but a little bit better. It prints hotter, so it can stand up to the temperature better. It isn't UV resistant, but it's better than PLA. Like you said about the food safe stuff, it is technically food safe, so water bottles, plastic bottles are typically PETG with the glycol modifier is what we use in 3D printing. Another thing to note about PETG versus PLA is it's sensitive to moisture in that it will absorb some water. If it's been sitting around, like our clear spool had been sitting around for like 6 months, chances are you need to dry it out, otherwise you're going to have print artifacts as a result. I'm pretty new to printing PETG in general. The one thing I've noticed with it is it doesn't print quite as well as PLA, although loading it up onto the Bamboo and using default settings and stuff, it printed exactly as good as PLA. In my past life, when I was an Ender Bro, I definitely noticed a lot more stringing, a lot more surface artifacts like globs and stuff. Those don't come off as well with a heat gun because it has higher heat resistance.
So PETG is pretty strong, and that's all good, but I'd rather show you how it crushes.
Just like last time, we're using our patented Keoprints testing method that doesn't give any numbers but definitely shows how stuff collapses. we are exploring the relationship between infill and perimeters. On this end, you have one perimeter, 5% infill, one perimeter, 10% infill, one perimeter, 15% infill. Do the same thing with two perimeters at 5, 10, and 15, and then three perimeters at 5, 10, and 15. There's the difference. Let's see what happens. No way. So for reference, this one was over there, and I was just sitting here. It went all the way over here and landed in my lap.
It got you.
Yeah, it did. It literally, like...
It did just boom, and I just felt it on my head. 5%, 3 perimeters 5%, 3 perimeters 15%. So are all the bits, like these bits go with that? Yep.
Okay.
So this all came from here.
This one was obviously the one that flew at me.
Yeah.
That has the orange on
You
it.
can tell.
What are you gathering? What do you see in here?
Kind of almost about the same results as the PLA. Came back much better. As we got to thicker and everything else, you start seeing where it stays. It's not going to go back to its shape as much. Far less pieces actually chipping off and everything.
All of them have this kind of deformation happening a lot more, whereas with the PLA ones, it wouldn't yield as much. We knew that going in, this was going to yield more. PLA wasn't going to yield as much. This, all of them have this indentation in them to some degree, you know? So like even the rigid ones
still clearly
still clearly yielded a bunch. Otherwise similar, yeah, PLA, this one did not spring back at all because, you know, rigid. Really none of them came back too well, but they didn't catastrophically fail. And with the PLA we saw like a lot more. This was the only one that really sheared.
Yeah,
because right on
shearing off the sides.
Yeah, right on the K, that's always where it shears, and it was only that one that really sheared. So a similar result, but still wildly different, even though this is really similar to PLA.
Yeah, so it makes sense.
Quite a bit different with the yield. And so it was what we expected, but it was cool to see it laid out like that. Nice. You've had better. That wasn't bad though. All right, we are looking at 5% infill, 1 perimeter. Look at it hold, dude.
Yeah.
It's not that much more flexible than PLA, but it's like way different. The way it bulged out at the side of the K and then just stayed there, and it kept squashing it and it just stayed there. Let's see what 10% infill, 1 perimeter. You got this one upside down.
I just noticed that. Yeah, look at that.
And then we'll see how much it comes back. Yeah, it kind of does,
pretty
kind of
decent.
doesn't. I mean, yeah, it's still just like we were looking at earlier. It's not catastrophic. It's just almost rubbery. All right, 15% infill, 1 perimeter still. So it's trying to shear, and it's doing that thing where it compresses up there. It's not bubbling out, sheared a little bit. All the individual cells are deforming instead of exploding. That's wild, man.
Yeah. This is the fun one.
That's the one that explodes
Yeah.
into my face. Ah, there it is. All that stored energy got kicked sideways and shot across the room. All right, we are on 2 perimeters, 10% infill. Ooh, that top
right
gave
there.
up a little bit. So now the cells they're not deforming as much individually. They're holding and then collapsing, but it's still not shattering. But each little cell kind of buckles. So we're starting to see a little bit more rigidity. These videos are fun. All right, so this one's probably gonna, it just bulges, man. It's trying to shear.
Oh, look at that plate.
It's hanging on, dude. It's trying to shear, but it's just not. Everything just collapses and yields. That's cool. On to 3 perimeters, 5%, baby. All right, so it's trying to bubble. It is bubbling quite a bit, but it's also got super rigid perimeters. Yeah, I mean, it definitely yielded, but it also fought back.
Yeah, the space.
Because, like, that's pretty well rigid, even though it had all that space in there. 3 walls, 10% infill. See the cells giving up there, and then it moves down to the next cells, and then it collapses some. Moves to the next cells, and it collapses some. All right, yielded. It gave up a little bit there. Gave up a little bit there. Yeah. So now we're starting to see more failure instead of just yielding. There she is. 3 perimeters, 15%. There's a shatter, a little bit. Even that's weird though, because it broke at the bottom.
Yeah.
It didn't shear at the top. It transferred all the force and then split at the bottom.
You notice, I think that one held its shape most on the little K part the whole time.
Yeah, on the line of the K.
Yeah.
It did. It just transferred all the load straight to the bottom. I wasn't expecting that drastic of a difference, I guess. Well, what do you think about all that, Corey?
I thought it was pretty cool. You did notice a difference between PETG and the PLA, and the flexibility was there. I didn't think we'd see it on this small of a scale, but you definitely noticed it a bit, but then it's still stuck true where the more rigid and more snaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. The jump from PLA to PETG when you talk about specs is like print's a bit higher, right? It tends to be a little less rigid, but generally speaking, from 3D printing perspective, like they're really similar. There's a lot of like ABS, ASA, that's styrene, completely different thing with different properties, does like just totally different, right? TPU is completely different thing. PLA and PETG, in terms of settings and printability, very similar. Yeah, PETG is a little more flexible. The tiniest bit.
Very little.
But when you zoom in and do this kind of testing, it really showed pretty drastic, like how different it was. That was pretty interesting. I wasn't expecting that big of a difference.
No, for sure.
So, PETG, it's good, it's cool. Prints just the same as PLA if you've got it on a bamboo machine instead of an ender machine that chews up build plate. Prints around 240, 260. The internet will tell you 220. Internet's wrong. Although we're on the internet right now, but we're not more right. We're less wrong than the other internet. How about that? Don't need an enclosure. Doesn't need a dry box, but it is a little bit more hydroscopic, so it sucks up water more so than PLA. That's kind of it. It's certainly become one of the more common 3D printing filaments. Not quite at PLA level, but now there's like tons of colors available. Like this is a clear one. There's enough demand that suppliers are offering comparable prices to PLA. Most printers can print it because the qualifications are pretty similar to PLA.
And it's recyclable.
And it's recyclable, dude. I mean, they all are.
This.
Food safe, water safe, liquid safe. I like the look of it.
What can it do?
Cool. That was a good one. If you like this video, check out our other videos. We talked about PETG in another video that I haven't finished editing yet as of recording this one, but by the time you see this, that video will be out. You should go look at that. If you want to see our deep dive into PLA, really not that deep of a dive, but you want to see us do this same thing for PLA, you should check out that video. There's a couple of those too. What filaments should we do this for? Next week, we're doing this filament. Does anybody think they know what this one's made out of? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.
Okay, bye.
Bye.